Well, hi, my name's John. Thanks for joining me on Digging Deeper this week. On Sunday, I spoke on Ezekiel 47, verses 1 to 12, looking at this river of life. It was really interesting to think about some of where Ezekiel was at that time, in exile in Babylon with the Jewish people, and they were feeling like cut off and separate and distant from God and from their land and from the promise of hope for the future. But Ezekiel was bringing them a message that their God was very much alive. Our God is very much alive in a time of crisis, such as we're in now with coronavirus, where we're in this time of loss and separation and distance, and that God is calling us to think about repentance, about turning back to Him, but not with a kind of rod and stick, but with a promise of hope for the future, with abounding grace as we turn back to Him, and a promise that healing will come. So it's interesting to think a little bit more about this passage in Ezekiel, and we didn't have a lot of time to go into some of the detail of the metaphors and some of the ideas around this prophecy with this river. And you've got to remember very much that a lot of what Ezekiel has written, very, very little of it is to say be taken literally. It's using words and language and ideas that the people who he is speaking to then can understand. He's not talking about a coming Messiah. He's not, although we can read so much of this as being fulfilled in Jesus, he is speaking to these people there and then. And you think about their view and their idea of the world. Of course, they're very much thinking about Genesis and how God made the world that was good, but that the land is now cursed because of man's disobedience, because of man going his and her own way. And Ezekiel is saying to them that the land will be washed clean of that curse. As you read some of the imagery in this passage, you read about abundance in the fruit. All kinds of fruit trees will grow along both sides of the river. Their leaves will never turn brown and fall, and they will always be fruit on their branches. Now, as far as the people who Ezekiel was speaking to would have understood, of course, the seasonality of fruit trees, of growth, of the restriction in the abundance of plants was all brought around by the curse. And that was all going to be wiped away. God was going to restore the relationship. So a renewal for Ezekiel and for that he was showing them was a renewal that was not just a spiritual renewal that we so often look for, but also a physical renewal as well. So it's a really interesting reminder to think about how this metaphor of this river flowing out actually demonstrates to us that when God calls us back to Himself, it's not just that He's promising that we will all be spiritually reconnected with Him, but that the actual physical world will be renewed. And we know that that is what is promised, that there will be a new heaven and a new earth when Jesus comes again. We're also seeing that the renewal of God's people, of course, is a complete work of divine grace. They would have thought so much about what they have to do, the offerings that they have to make in order to renew the relationship with God. And so much of what has been talked about before this was specifics about building the temple and restoring God to His holiness. But you see that God here almost trumps everything that He's said so far. Yes, He must be made holy. Yes, the people must turn back to Him. But His overriding desire is for abundance and grace. That not by their will, not by our might, but by His will and His grace will the curse be lifted and will the promise be restored. So there's so much to look at in here. I can't recommend enough getting some commentaries on Ezekiel and having a look even deeper into some of the metaphors around this. But I think it's really significant to think of how this can apply to our own lives actually as we go on. And there is so much to take, although this message, as I say, is for those people at that time, is no less for us, that we might rejoice in knowing that our well-being is the passion of God. That the work of renewal in our life is not down to us, but is to a complete divine work. And of course, God's absolute interest into eternity in the environment and in His environment, and in renewing that as much as He wants to renew our spirit. So plenty to think about, plenty to discuss in your home groups, and I hope you enjoy that.